welcome to the Chancellor's Associates Colloquium. I'm Jerry Milana, Chair of Chancellor's Associates and UC San Diego alum, class of 1986. It's such a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. It's been a momentous year for Chancellor's Associates, and this is actually the 10th virtual colloquium we've hosted since the pandemic began last March. And we look forward to continuing to provide our Triton community with opportunities for lifelong learning, such as today's program. And we encourage everyone to visit our Chancellor's Associates website to view our calendar of events. Now, to introduce our featured speaker today, we have our Dean of the Division of Arts and Humanities, Cristina Della Colletta. Dean Colletta was appointed in 2014 and holds the Chancellor's Associates Chair in Italian Literature. Under her leadership, the division will open a new location for the Institute of Arts and Humanities within the North Torrey Pines Living and Learning Neighborhood Community. Please join me in a warm welcome for Dean Della Colletta.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate your thoughtful words, and I'm so grateful to be here today. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. As it is commencement week, I want to quickly say thank you to all our faculty and staff. It has been a remarkable year indeed, in many ways, and your commitment to our students who are graduating to become UC San Diego alumni is much appreciated. I feel that we are at a turning point for arts and humanities at UC San Diego, and Chancellor's Associates play an important role in that. The Division of Arts and Humanities graduates a greater percentage of transfer students than any other academic division, and we are matching our graduation rate with an increase in newly admitted transfer and first-generation students each year. We have a unique partnership with the San Diego Community College District that encourages and prepares transfer students specifically into our departments. And it was no surprise to me that one of the students involved in the launching the Transfer Triton Hub was a history major. When the campus safely opens again this fall, we will return to a new era for our disciplines. Symbolically, it happens through the new Arts and Humanities building that now houses all of the humanities departments, as well as our Institute of Arts and Humanities in one central location for the first time in the university's history. We are providing access for our students to our faculty in ways never before imagined, to both meet the demands of our growing student population, but also the needs of our fragmented society. Today, we're gathering in part to recognize the foundational importance of the arts and the humanities to all students, regardless of their major. And in particular, we are recognizing distinguished Professor Anthony Davis from our groundbreaking Department of Music. Like our additional departments, music was founded on the desire to be innovative and groundbreaking, both in what we offer students, but also in the research and creativity cultivated by our faculty. Their work is diverse, interdisciplinary, and forward-thinking. Anthony Davis exemplifies all of these things, and it appears the world is now catching up. In 2020, he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for his opera, The Central Park Five, perhaps a capstone honor for a career that spans decades. And if I were to guess, one that is nowhere near complete. In 1986, Anthony's Life and Times of Malcolm X played to sold-out houses at its premiere, marking a first in a new genre, contemporary opera that addresses a contemporary subject. It gives me incredible pleasure to say that opera is not dead. It is rather being transformed and innovated by talents such as Anthony Davis, Susan Naruki, Lei Liang, all from our own Department of Music. to focus on timely topics. And this is what I find the most compelling about Anthony's work. It reflects and explores key issues of our time. And it is these issues of racism, the justice system, listening and learning from Black voices and Black history that resonate, not only with audiences in the concert halls, but with students in the classroom. We know our students are deeply connected to and concerned about the equality and social justice. They're empathetic to the struggles of others. And what's more, as alumni, they will teach the world about caring and understanding. There is no social issue, from global public health to climate change to immigration, that won't benefit from more knowledge, and a knowledge that through empathy turns into concrete action. And students in the arts and humanities at UC San Diego are being uniquely prepared to meet the challenges that these issues present. The students who study and find a mentor in professors like Anthony Davis. It is now my pleasure to introduce Anthony Davis, a creative leader, an artistic soul, a giving colleague. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Dean Della Coletta, for that wonderful introduction. And I'm happy to be here today and speak with you. For me, it was really interesting in the beginning of 2000, last year in 2020, I was at a funny juncture because, with the COVID pandemic, all my commissions were canceled. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And I decided in that space that to revisit my opera X, A Life and Times of Malcolm X, largely because when I wrote that opera, it was pre-computer days, and so I never inputted the opera into a computer program. So it was written in the old-fashioned way, written by hand, the whole score. And so I decided to I wanted to input make a kind of what I would call excerpts concerts, which would be, taking different scenes of X and allowing them to present it like with orchestras, et cetera. And so I started to input the opera. And when I did it, it was really funny because I was looking back at my 35-year-old self, 35 years later, just about 35 years later. And so I couldn't help but try to make some changes and revisions. So I started to revise some of the opera as I went through it. And then after I won the Pulitzer in May, I got a call from Yuval Sharon, and he wanted to do the whole opera. So I was able to, and I had done the excerpts part, so I was able to start working on the whole opera and revisiting it. So when X came out, it was in first performance was in Philadelphia in 1985, and then in 1986 at New York City Opera. And it was this opera was kind of emblematic of what was pejoratively called by Peter Davis in New York Magazine as CNN operas. And I don't think that was really an accurate term to talk about, but I think we were, myself and others were trying to wrestle with it with kind of American mythology. How we can deal with our recent past and how that could translate into opera. And today we look in this post-George Floyd moment and with the rise of Black Lives Matter, and we ask the question, how can opera address the issues of today? And all of a sudden, 35 years later, X became a lot more relevant to people. So I'll have a list here of some operas that dealt with more contemporary subjects. Beginning with Satyagraha, with Philip Glass's opera about Gandhi in South Africa. Of course, X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X. And then after that was Nixon in China, Death of Klinghoffer, My Opera Tanya about the Patty Hearst kidnapping, Harvey Milk by Stuart Wallace and Michael Corey about legendary leader in San Francisco, Dr. Atomic about Oppenheimer and the bomb. And of course, my opera from 2019, The Central Park Five, which dealt with Donald Trump and also the emergence during the time of 1989 was also the premiere of Do the Right Thing, which was just kind of coincided with that. So I want to talk a little bit about how, when I was looking back 35 years and looking back at when I was doing the opera, I was thinking about what brought me to opera, why opera became so important to me. And I think Dean Della Coletta will find very interesting that I discovered my conception of opera in Italy when I was in 10th grade. And so in 10th grade, was spent in Torino, Italy. My father had a Fulbright, was teaching at the university. And I was fortunate to have this wonderful teacher who had come to Italy to become a priest, but fell in love with a woman and decided God was dead, and became an English professor and decided to start a philosophy class in my high school. So it was offered to 10th through 12th graders. So I was in the philosophy class and I read Birth of Tragedy. And The Birth of Tragedy made an enormous impression on me, Nietzsche's early book. And I was intrigued by the opposition of the Apollonian and the Dionysian, the art and music as form and structure versus art as revolutionary spirit, both creative and destructive aspects of that. And that binary of the Apollonian Dionysian, when I looked at it, when I look at Nietzsche's writing, he was trying at that time, he was a supporter of Wagner. Later in his letters to Wagner, he would repudiate Wagner. But I was intrigued by it because it implied a kind of duality that I felt was in American music, not necessarily pertaining to so much to German music, but this idea of the composed versus the improvised, the African American tradition versus the European tradition. And so I began to think about envisioning, and in my naive 10th grade brain, about this idea of maybe I could create an opera someday, an opera that would both have the form and structure taken from the European tradition of opera, but also include the improviser, the impact of the immediacy of improvisation, and it could represent both the European and the African. So in a sense that this idea of creating a new form, uniquely American form that would of opera that will allow for that certainly influenced by Ellington and Charles Mingus and Thelonious Monk and the whole tradition of the African American composers in American music, and at the same time, address some of the major issues of our time. And my first thought was to do, when I was in 10th grade, I just read Invisible Man. So I thought, well, I would love to do an opera on Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. I think maybe in the future I may actually do this, but so that was my initial idea, and it became sort of a motivating factor in terms of what I was doing and how I developed as a composer and as a musician. Okay. The conception of X, how X came to be, and it was my brother was performing in a play called El Hajj Malik and playing the role of Malcolm X in the play, and so I went to the play, and after the performance, my brother came up to me and said, "You should write a musical about Malcolm X." And the reason he mentioned that, because in the autobiography, there are so many references to music. I mean, Malcolm was surrounded by music. I mean, he worked the dance halls in Boston and New York as a young man. He was a hustler who was around the music all the time. And there are a lot of references to music in the autobiography. Also, my father's friend, Billy Taylor, who was a wonderful pianist, jazz pianist, and also hosted a radio program in the 1960s at WBAI. And the radio program, they would have Malcolm would do a speech on a Sunday, and then they have jazz after Malcolm's speech. So Malcolm would always stay for the speech. So literally, you have Malcolm making a speech and John Coltrane Quartet playing after it. So that to me brought a lot of things together. So I began. So my brother's idea about X was to do an opera that where the parallel would show the parallel development, musical developments, particularly in jazz and improvised music, from, let's say, the late 1940s to the 1960s. So that would take you from the kind of late big band era of, with Ellington and Strayhorn, or two composers I really admire, and the emergence of Louis Jordan and jump blues and more popular forms of jazz of the late 1940s. And then, of course, the emergence of bebop in the late 40s and 50s with Charles and great composers like Charles Mingus and Thelonious Monk, and arriving at modal jazz with John Coltrane and Miles in the 60s, and the emergence of free jazz, so-called free jazz, with Ornette Coleman in the early 1960s. So that parallel development of the music's transformation from the 40s to the 60s, and Malcolm's evolution as a young man who was very troubled young man who became in the 60s such a prominent leader. And so that was that initial conception of X. I found that kind of inadequate as, in terms of what I wanted to say in the opera, because in working on the opera, and I started to do that, there are some elements of that history embedded in the opera. If you look at Street's music, and that's in Act 1, that's emblematic. I was thinking a lot about kind of the blues structures that Louis Jordan might use, or Ellington or Mingus might use. But at the same time, I felt that I wanted that there's a deeper connection, musical connection I can make to this history. And that deeper connection was to a kind of a history of violence that I felt was embedded in the story. The opera begins, and you discover that Earl Little, Malcolm's father, has been murdered. He was involved in a Marcus Garvey movement, and he was murdered by a Klansman and pushed on a trolley track. So this kind of cycle of violence that Malcolm had to confront, and also haunted him in a real way, I felt was something that really became a major concern in terms of how I conceive the music. So then, and also it makes a connection today. I mean, the cycle of violence we see in violence towards Blacks that we see today, in emblematic George Floyd, et cetera. And I began to think about how I could wrestle with that in music. And I arrived at an idea of kind of a rhythmic drama that was somewhat influenced, I think, by Balinese gamelan music, is the idea of having rhythmic structures as a kind of foundation of the opera. Also, creating the kind of momentum and propulsion in music that would drive the drama. The drama would be driven by rhythm and rhythmic structures. So there would be recurring rhythmic structures that could function in a similar manner to how leitmotifs in Wagner's operas work. So I might have a 13/8 passage, or in many cases, there were rhythmic structures of 11 that occur in the opera in many different forms. And that's always part of, it's kind of embedded in a way, because to create this sense of rhythmic inevitability, the idea that the momentum creates a kind of tragic inevitability, that Malcolm is driven toward his eventual death, his murder, and that all the elements are always there. It's kind of, to me, is Malcolm was, and looking at Malcolm and looking at this opera, Malcolm was a kind of a tragic hero, and the tragic hero aspect really is what drew me to this story. And in a way, X in some ways is very Wagnerian, because it points to this idea of what is the tragic, and how music can create the inevitable at the same time, and how a character's destiny is driven, is kind of driven by the music. So that was very interesting to me in terms of my thoughts about in creating the opera. The X, Life and Times of Malcolm X, premiered in New York City Opera in 1986, and it was composed by me with a libretto by Talani Davis and a book by Christopher Davis, my brother. and was directed by Rhoda Levine and Rhoda Levine. Now, the aria I want to play from the opera is Malcolm's aria from Act 1, Scene 3, and this actually concludes Act 1 of the opera. And to set the scene, this is what you're going to hear is a concert version that was done last January. To set the scene, Malcolm has been arrested. He's been arrested for, he's been dealing drugs. He's been also a pimp. He robbed a jewelry store, and he and the character Street, who's kind of amalgam of different characters in Malcolm's life, have been arrested, and he's under interrogation. And one thing that's fascinating about this particular scene is that it's an interrogation that when it was staged in New York City Opera, you saw a spotlight on Malcolm's face. His hands are tied behind his back. He's looking toward the spotlight, and it's as if he's being interrogated by the police. And what I found interesting about it is that you never hear the questions. You never hear the question. You don't hear the police. You just hear Malcolm's answers, and Malcolm's answers are not at all what the police expect. And the title of the aria is "You Want the Truth, but You Don't Want to Know." And this is and Malcolm talks about what his truth is. What is the source of his rage at this particular time? And so the music is sort of and the aria sort of depicts Malcolm's state of mind at this point. His rage against what he thinks is what has happened to him. His father's murder. His mother's has been sent to a mental institution. So the dissolution of his family, all these things that happen, and now he finally gets to express what he really feels. Of course, this isn't realistic. You never be able to tell these stories to the police, but that's part of the irony of it. Okay. This performance of Malcolm's aria is by Devon Tynes, who performs as Malcolm X. And actually, he will be performing as Malcolm X in the production in Michigan Opera Theater. That will be next year, in May of 2022. This particular version, the concert version, was done with the Philadelphia Orchestra, conducted by Yannick Segin, and recorded just this past January in 2021, and released sort of as a streamed presentation by the orchestra. The new production will be at the Michigan Opera Theater, Opera Omaha, and Seattle Opera between 2022 and 2024. There'll also be a concert performance in Boston where we'll be doing a new recording of X. And there are plans to do it in New York as well, but I can't talk about that yet. Okay.
I would not tell you what I know. You wouldn't hear my truth. You want the story, but you don't want to know. My truth is you've been on me a very long time. Longer than I can say. As long as I've been living, you've had your foot on me, always pressing. My truth is white men killed my own men, drove my mother mad. My truth is rough, my truth could kill, my truth is fury. They always told me you don't have a chance. You're a nigger after all. You can jitterbug and prance, but you'll never run the ball. My truth told me quit before you start. My truth told me staying alive is all you've got. I've shined your shoes, I've sold your dope, called your bootleg, played with hustlers' hope. But the crime is mine. I will do your time so you can sleep. I won't be out to get you on the street at night, but I won't forget any evil that's white. a hammer coming from the back. It will beat you down when you least expect. I wouldn't tell you what I know. You want the truth. You want the truth. You want the truth, but you don't want to know.
So that was a performance from January that's on video. They're going to do it actually live at November in the fall. So there'll be a live performance of the aria that the orchestra is going to do in Philadelphia. So here are some of the lyrics. I would not tell you what I know, you would not hear my truth. Talani, and there's some prescient things in it. Like, for example, a friend of mine was pointing this out and said, we wrote this in 1985, or as long as I've been living, you've had your foot on me, always pressing. So, and when I think about George Floyd, it always that line always be really telling to me. Let's see. Okay, great. Okay, the aria expresses Malcolm's rage, and his rage is not only personal, but a projection of the inevitable response to racism. And so, Malcolm's aria not only speaks to his rage, but to our rage in general, the sense of outrage that one feels when basic human rights are not granted. The aria recalls, and musically, the aria brings back themes that were in the overture to the opera. When I wrote the overture to the opera, I based some of the overture on a piano piece called Middle Passage, and some of those themes, and then I brought themes from that piano piece come back all throughout the opera. But in here at the end of Act 1 in Malcolm's aria, particularly, a lot of those themes are present, and the idea is also it draws you back to Earl's murder, that is set up by the overture in the beginning, and the sense that of clashing tonalities in it, the collision of tonalities as well as the collision of rhythmic structures, and that's in a way I wanted to about ways of creating different kinds of tension, which I call rhythmic tension as well as harmonic tension, and also the 5/4, 5/8 passages that you're which is in 5. It makes the rage kind of a dance of the, and I'm always interested in the embodiment of music, how you feel music in your body. That's also the sense of I think that's something that's been lost a lot in opera, is the idea that music in opera is also about movement, about moving bodies on the stage. So in that aria, in this music, I have that sense of the rhythmic momentum, is rhythm as projecting kind of the underlying violence, the violence that's as Malcolm X would say famously, that is as American as apple pie. So there's that violence that's always there, and I think we're so we're aware of it today that we're always surrounded by violence, and violence is a part of our everyday life. So I would like to close that and open up to any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Professor Davis. Wow, I thought that Malcolm's aria was just so powerful and fantastic. Yeah,
thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
We have several questions. So let's start with the first. What is your creative process?
Okay, my creative process. It varies somewhat. I think in composing opera in particular, I like to have the libretto first. I like to have the words first. And sometimes I think about structure and the overall structure and form of an opera, where it's going to go. And then we come up with the synopsis, about what scenes are going to happen where. And that's something I work with a librettist very closely on. And then when I actually get the words, I like to get as much of it as possible. If I can have the whole opera, that's the preferable thing. Then I go to the piano and I play through the whole thing. I improvise music to the whole opera. I just go from beginning to the end, and I just sort of to getting a feel for what I want to go, the areas I want to go to, and what might be goal points within the music. And then I really begin working, in a linear fashion from beginning to end. I don't like to write Wagner used to write the conclusions of his operas, the climaxes first. I would never do that because I like to discover it. If I knew where the music exactly was going to go and what the climax was, I probably would never write it because it would be done. So I like to discover it as I go along.
How long did it take you to write the full opera?
For this opera took some time because also it was the whole opera. This opera is over 2 hours and 45 minutes of music, so it's 3 acts, and so it took me a couple of years to write. I think about 2.5 years, and I wrote it in segments. I wrote the first. I naively, when it was asked in 1983 whether I could complete an opera for spring of 1984, I said, "Oh, sure." So I did write the first act, but for a 10-piece ensemble. But I learned then, what it really takes, and that's one thing I love about opera is because you wake up every day and there's something to do. There's a direction, and it's you're working on one project for a long period of time, and it's kind of all-consuming thing.
Thank you. Our next question is, what has been your most fulfilling experience as a faculty member instructing and inspiring the next generation of performers?
Oh, I think there'll be so many of them. Working with very talented composers and people who, exploring their ideas and be inspired by what they do. I think there's a lot of talent here at UCSD, and that's always very exciting. And they have musical ideas I don't have. They go in directions I don't go. So that's always exciting to me. And I think in undergraduate teaching, I've always found it's been so rewarding to deal with subject matter and stuff that gets them to think and gets them to understand the connection to their lives.
Thank you. Are there any? Here's the next question. Are there any notable alumni you've collaborated with or worked with?
Oh, alumni, yes. I've worked with Jason Robinson, a number of musicians. Michael Desson collaborated. He was the trombone player in my opera that I just did, Central Park 5. Mark Dresser, of course, has been a long term collaborator with me. We've been playing together almost 50 years. and he was a graduate of UCSD, and now is a professor here, a distinguished professor here at UCSD. And so we worked together, and he's performed in, I think, almost every opera of mine since X, at some point. And I've written a lot of my operas with his bass playing in mind. I've also collaborated with faculty members like Susan Naruki was in my opera Lear on the Second Floor, and the opera, the libretto was written by Alan Havis, who's a playwright here at the UCSD, and so it's been great. I've had a great time here at UCSD collaborating with people. And then at UCSD, when George Lewis was here at UCSD, was a professor of music here, and we were classmates at Yale, and so we've been playing together and working together since the early 70s. So so he's been a very important part of my development musically too.
Great, thank you. So I have a fun question for you. What was your reaction when you received word that you won a Pulitzer?
Well, I was actually in the middle. I was in the middle of a faculty meeting. And the phone kept ringing because when they do announce a Pulitzer, they don't tell you ahead of time. It's just they just release the news to the press. So then the press kind of contacts you. So someone from New Music USA was leaving messages on my phone, and I heard this message. I said, "Oh, well, I better pick it up." So I go pick it up, and I forgot to mute the Zoom. So I picked up the phone and it said, "Oh, congratulations!" I said, "For what?" And they said, "Well, you won the Pulitzer Prize in music." So I said, "Hey," so I called to my wife. I said, "Hey, Cindy, I won the Pulitzer Prize." And so the whole music faculty heard it when I heard it.
Oh, that's so cool, though. But congratulations, and what a wonderful, wonderful story.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. I think Steve Schick called it the best Zoom bomb ever. So
That's great. We have several more questions. Next one is, what other projects are you currently working on?
Well, I'm working on an opera called Fire Across the Tracks, which is about the Tulsa Race Massacre. I composed recently, did an aria that Devon sang in Tulsa they had a program called Greenwood Overcomes, and so they previewed an aria from the opera. And I also have another piece I'm working on here in San Diego called Poncho Rabbit and the Coyote, which is a children's opera about the border, about immigration, about migrant workers, and it's based on a children's book by a Mexican author.
Great. When do you expect us to hear more on your Tulsa opera?
Which opera? The Tulsa opera. I think that it'll be done, I think, in 2024. Something. I think that's the date, because they have to build the new opera house first. They're building a new theater that they're going to present the opera, where they're going to present the opera.
Thank you. Another question is, what direction would you like to see the music department take?
Oh, I think we can do more in terms of promoting diversity. I think in terms of we've and I think that we were trying to make strides in that direction so that particularly among our graduate students, that we were more representative of what particularly Americans and Californians are. And I think that's something we're moving toward. And I think I'm very excited about the new faculty members we have here at UCSD with King Britt and Kamau Kenyatta and so many exciting people. Stephanie Richards. I mean, so many exciting people have come in, and I think there's an incredible new energy in the department. I'm very optimistic about the future.
Thank you. Here's a question from one of our attendees. Can you situate yourself in the history of Black opera composers?
Okay. Yeah, well, I think so. I think, well, in a way you have to start, I mean, you can start, I guess, with Stott Joplin, did Treemonisha, and then we and Grant Still, who did Troubled Island, which was done actually premiered at New York City Opera in the 1940s. I think, I've been successful in having my operas produced too. So then, in the 80s and beyond that. And I think there's been there are now so many talented young composers writing operas, and African Americans. And I'm excited to see that, from Carlos Simon and so many others. I have to mention Nukuru Okuru also writes opera. George Lewis just wrote an opera. So I think there's a flowering of opera composers today, and I'm excited to be sort of, in a way, I was a kind of vanguard of that.
Thank you. Our next question is back to X. What is the most significant part of this opera that you relate to most, and why?
Well, significant part. Well, I think what it is in telling a story, it was that we decided to make it about his spiritual life, about the evolution of his thinking from, what his rage that he felt, in Malcolm's aria, which ends Act 1, to, he's joining the Nation of Islam, with the chorus Allahu Akbar, and then at the end, then when he makes his pilgrimage to Mecca, and he takes on the name Al Hajj Malik Al Shabazz, and you hear the music of prayer from the Quran. So I think that odyssey, this idea of his journey through all the name changes from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X to Detroit Red to Malcolm X, and then to Al Hajj Malik, I think is one of the great stories in our history.
Thank you. Our next question is, I know you told us about your Tulsa opera and the one for the children coming up, but what's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, I think that the operas are really important. I mean, I've been working on this revision of X, which is really interesting because originally, as I said, it was 3 acts and 2 hours and 45 minutes. Now it's going to be a 2-act opera with about a little over 2 hours. A little bit more concise, and I think it'll be even more powerful. And I actually, with some of the cuts I made, I wrote a new scene in the opera, which is a scene with Betty and Malcolm. So I'm very excited about that, to see that realized, and that'll happen starting in May 2022. And then also casting that with a whole new generation of singers and players, and that's exciting as well. But I think I'm also working on a couple books that I'm writing. So I'm writing a book about Charles Mingus and about his music and relationship to my music. And then I plan to also write a book about my conception of opera, about my operas, but also more about the ideas behind the operas. Thank
you for that. When we talk about opera, I love opera, and I am fascinated, and I look forward to seeing, the revision of X and hearing the beautiful music. But what can we do to get younger audiences interested in opera? I think it may be the term where maybe the, visions of, traditional opera and not, our modern operas come into mind. And so what suggestions do you have on how we can get more people interested in such a beautiful art form?
Well, I think that's happening is, and it's funny, it's not to assume that they wouldn't be. I mean, if they're exposed to it and they hear it. I remember when I was doing, I did an opera theater, St. Louis. This was in '89. It was a science fiction opera. It was based on science fiction stories. And everyone was saying, well, the music's not melodic and all this stuff, the general thing that contemporary composers hear from, people who supposedly know about opera, it's from that world. And so I did a presentation at a elementary school in St. Louis, and it was the inspector's aria from the opera, and afterward they were all singing it, and they were all excited about it and singing it. So I don't think we assume that. Sometimes we assume that something that's not, it doesn't have traditional tonality, etc. People won't be able to relate to it. And I think it's wrong. I think that especially children are much more open to new musical ideas than we think.
I agree, and I think that's wonderful too. On the children's opera that you're working on, I think it'll get a new generation interested. And I totally agree with you that if we can get them to hear it, they'll fall in love, with the music and the art form. But I appreciate your insight on that.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the children's opera because I'm working with Quincy Troop, wonderful former colleague who used to be here at UCSD. He's writing the libretto, and it'll be in Spanish and English. And I was very interested in. It's kind of a little bit like Animal Farm, in that you have animal characters, but it tells a story about the border and the wall and all that stuff. So I think there's a political message behind it too, but at the same time it should be fun too. So it's, you're dealing with, you know, the border's guarded by snakes, and you know, it's like, you know, so there'd probably be an orange alligator or something.
Great, that's cool. I can't wait. When is the ETA on that? When we can hear more?
I'm working with an organization called Bodhi Tree Concerts. I think I think in probably a couple of years, I'm going to try to develop it here, you know, at UCSD. Maybe do some things with it at the new extension space. I've talked to them about it. You know, maybe trying to develop some of the opera at UCSD. You know, and we have some wonderful singers from Tijuana, from Mexico, who are in our program now in the music department. So I hope to work with them on it.
Thank you so much. I look forward to that. And I know our attendees and our Triton family are as well. But I see that we're just about at time. And I want to thank you so much, Professor Davis.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you. And it's great to see you. Okay.
It's terrific. And I love that you were able to share a little bit of acts and the aria. That was beautiful and powerful. So thank you. And also thanks for sharing with us your creative process. That was neat to hear, you know, sort of behind the scenes and peek behind the curtain on, you know, what goes into the creation of an opera. And we wish you all the best.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Great to see you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dean Della Coletta, thank you for your introduction.
Thanks, Dean.
Yes, thank you for your introduction and support of Chancellor's Associate in our event today. I also want to thank all of our Chancellor's Associates donors. You're part of a team helping to transform both UC San Diego and the lives of our students. And I encourage our guests in attendance to join us in inspiring and supporting our students. So contact us at our email at ca@ucsd.edu or visit our website if you'd like to learn more. Thank you again. We look forward to seeing you in the fall for our next series of Chancellor's Associates events. Have a great afternoon.